Ever feel like learning's more like being force-fed? Like you just got to swallow and then like spit it all back out.
Right.
Well, today we're diving into Charlotte Mason.
Yeah.
And she had a totally different take on things.
Totally. We're looking at volume 6, and she really gets into this whole idea of the child's mind being active and learning, not like an empty container.
Okay, so no more kids as empty containers. What's Mason's alternative?
So back then, the receptacle theory was popular. Basically, think of the mind like a container, and teachers, their job's to fill it up with knowledge.
Kind of like,
it's like
arranging snacks, hoping some actually get eaten.
Exactly. Like carefully arranging snacks. And, well, Mason wasn't a fan.
Yeah, makes sense. So then how should we approach learning?
This is where it gets really cool.
Yeah.
She saw a child's mind as this, she called it a spiritual organism.
Spiritual organism, okay.
Yeah, it's vivid, right. It's not passive at all. It actually craves knowledge.
A mind that craves knowledge. Now, that's an image I can get behind. But how do we feed this hungry mind then?
Think of it like providing a really good intellectual diet.
Yeah.
And no force feeding allowed. Mason was all about giving kids a feast of ideas from great literature, history, science, art. She really believed that when kids experience those big, important ideas head on, their minds, they just naturally engage. They analyze, they form their own understanding.
So instead of like tiny bite-sized pieces, she wanted kids to experience the whole feast.
Yeah, exactly.
Because we all know processed cheese is easy to eat, but aged cheddar with all those complex flavors,
right.
That's the good stuff, right?
It's about trusting that they can handle complexity and that they actually thrive on it.
Okay, but how do we do that in a way that doesn't, overwhelm them?
Right, so that's where Mason's critique of this one lesson plan comes in. It was called the Robinson Crusoe concentration scheme.
Okay.
So picture this really elaborate year-long plan all about that one book.
Okay, so on the surface, that sounds kind of cool, right?
Yeah, you'd think so, right?
Yeah.
But Mason saw it as like what not to do.
Why is that? Too much of a good thing.
Kind of, yeah. She felt this overstructuring, while well-intentioned, would just stifle a child's natural curiosity and their joy in learning. It's like someone spoiling a story before you get to experience it.
Right.
Where's the fun in that?
Yeah, it's like those super perfect science projects, the ones where it's like clearly the parents did it, not the kid.
Right.
They might check all the boxes, but are they actually like sparking that light of learning?
Exactly. And that's where seeing the mind as a spiritual organism is so important. Real learning happens when we allow ourselves to wrestle with ideas, make our own connections, come to our own conclusions.
So it's less about dictating and more like guiding and trusting.
Yes, exactly. But to get why this is so important, we got to understand the context she was working in. We need to dig into this whole receptacle theory she was pushing back against.
You mean that idea that the mind's like, oh, container waiting to be filled. I'm curious about how different thinkers saw this,
Well, one of the big names for this receptacle model was Herbart. And his views on the mind, well, let's just say, very different from Mason's.
Okay, so let's unpack that. We've got snacks on a plate, the receptacle theory. So what did classrooms actually look like with Herbart's ideas?
Picture this. Teacher at the front, the holder of all knowledge, carefully giving out info to all those waiting minds.
And I'm guessing Mason saw maybe some flaws in that system. Flaws might be putting it mildly.
Yeah.
She actually quoted this passage describing Herbart, and get this, she called it dry Scottish humor.
Yeah, she had a way with words.
Totally. So it basically said that to Herbart, the mind has zero power.
It's just a collection of ideas all crammed in there.
Right.
Yeah.
A far cry from a spiritual organism. Right.
Total opposite.
Talk about a difference of opinion, huh? So instead of our minds shaping ideas, the ideas are shaping us.
Exactly. And for Herbart, the teacher basically becomes this architect. They're responsible for picking the right ideas, putting them in order.
Which honestly sounds kind of impossible, right? And more than a little controlling.
Yeah.
Who are we to decide what a kid should think?
It's a good point. And Mason felt this put way too much on teachers.
Yeah.
And it really limited a child's potential. Think about it. If we just give them prepackaged info,
Right.
how can they develop their own thoughts, their own sense of wonder?
It's like handing someone a bouquet versus giving them seeds and soil,
Ooh, I like that.
One's nice to look at, sure, but the other,
Right.
watching it sprout, taking care of it.
That's where the real magic is.
Yeah.
That's what Mason was all about, that organic growth. She believed that kids, when they get to explore, to ask questions, to make their own connections.
Yeah.
They'll naturally be drawn to what interests them, what makes them curious.
Which brings us back to that whole Robinson Crusoe thing. Instead of letting kids find the magic themselves, it's like...
Force feeding.
It is, just marching through someone else's analysis.
It's the difference between just consuming information and really engaging with it. Think about a time you learned something deeply, something that stuck with you. Was it because someone told it to you, or because you were right there in it?
It's like when you get sucked into a good book, you know? You totally lose track of time because you're just there.
Yes, that. That's the experience Mason wanted for kids.
To love learning for learning, not just for a grade.
Exactly. And it goes back to her main point. The child isn't empty. They're an active participant, a spiritual organism that wants to learn and grow.
Which kind of makes you wonder about how we do education. You know, all the standardized testing, the focus on just getting the right answer. It seems like we've lost sight of the joy of it all.
It's a valid concern. And while structure is important,
sure,
when it becomes the only focus,
yeah,
we lose sight of what matters, raising curious, engaged, lifelong learners.
So then how do we balance it? How do we honor that natural love of learning in a kid, but also, you know,
prepare them for the world as it is?
Yeah.
That's the million-dollar question. I think Mason would say it starts by seeing the child as like the driver of their own education.
So not knowledge being poured in, but something they seek out themselves.
Yes. And creating those environments, the ones that make them curious, that empower them to follow what they're passionate about.
And that's not just books, right? It's the whole environment.
Everything. The relationships, the chances to explore.
It's like a whole culture of learning everywhere, not just in school.
Exactly. So then the question becomes, what does that look like in practice?
Right. How do we create that?
Well, Mason really believed in using high-quality stuff, especially what she called living books. Living books. Okay, I already like where this is going. So living books. Huh. What'd she mean by that? Like they literally come to life off the page.
I wish. Though knowing Mason, she probably would have found that engaging. But no, she meant books that are well-written, engaging, you know, the kind that really make you think. Not like those dry textbooks. Okay. So the kind that spark a kid's imagination, not just their memorization. Like instead of just a boring timeline, it's more like a historical novel that sucks you in.
Exactly. She wanted kids to experience those subjects, history, science, all of them, through books that made them feel real and exciting.
It's like, man, those subjects that always felt so dull in school, what if we learned them that way?
It's amazing how a different approach can totally change how you see things. And for Mason, it wasn't just the what you learned, but also the how. She was a huge fan of what she called narration.
Narration, so getting kids to tell stories.
Sort of. It was more like encouraging them to really think about what they were learning. So after reading, or maybe hearing a lesson, they'd have to tell it back in their own words.
Interesting. So not just soaking it in, but actually having to process it right away.
Yeah. And it wasn't about remembering every single detail. It was about helping them think for themselves, you know, making connections, really getting it on a deeper level.
And it probably helps them find their own voice too, right? How to express their own understanding.
Exactly. And that, to Mason, was huge. It's not just about filling their heads with facts, but about helping them grow as a whole person.
Which takes us right back to that spiritual organism idea. Not just stuffing information in, but really nourishing that love of learning.
Yes. Giving them what they need to become lifelong learners, the kind of people who always want to discover more.
And, you know, what blows me away is how relevant this all still is. Like, Mason was writing over 100 years ago, but it feels like she's speaking directly to us now.
It's true. If anything, it's even more relevant now with all the standardized testing and pressure to perform.
Right. We've lost sight of the joy, the magic of getting lost in a good book, of discovering something new.
And the toll it takes. No wonder so many kids end up feeling burnt out by learning. Mason would say education should be a joy, not just another thing to stress over.
It should be about nurturing that curiosity we're all born with, you know, that desire to figure things out, explore.
It really makes you think how different things could be if we started from that place.
So where do we even begin? How do we bring back that sense of wonder, that love of learning, both for ourselves and for the kids in our lives?
You know, I think Mason would say it starts with ourselves, really. Being curious, noticing the world around us, remembering what it feels like to be amazed by something new.
Yeah.
Learning isn't just for the classroom. It's for everyone. And it can happen anywhere, anytime. We just have to be open to it.
It's about nurturing that spiritual organism, right?
Mhm.
Feeding that hunger to learn. And honestly, who knows what amazing places it might take us? It's pretty exciting when you think about it that way.
It really is. And on that note, we'll let you continue exploring Charlotte Mason's ideas on your own. See what resonates, see what sparks your own curiosity. Thanks for joining us for this deep dive, and we'll see you next time.